Well, hi, everyone. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona, and this is Derby Watch for the first time this season. No changes to the previous week. There were no preps, no points, no defections that we are aware of. So David and I will take this opportunity to do something a little bit different and address a few topics that we hope you find interesting. But before we do that, David, how about a quick review of the Derby Watch list, including the widely believed favorite, Forte?
Yeah, as you said, it's the exact same list, exact same odds as last week. No preps, so no changes to this list. And luckily, no horses dropping off the list due to injury or setback. So we're just kind of in a holding pattern for now. I set Forte as the 3-1 favorite last week, dropping his odds after the defection of Arabian Night about 10 days ago at this point. So he is the clearly defined favorite for the Kentucky Derby with about 6 weeks to go. But there's going to be a lot of movement, Brad, over the next few weeks because we're about to head into that final round of prep races. And as I was highlighting on Derby Watch last week, there are a lot of horses still on the list who need to get points. Horses like National Treasure, King's Barnes have 0 points. Go Rocket Ride only has 15. So many horses really need to achieve results in this final round of preps to hold on to their current rankings.
Yeah, there are 10 remaining points preps that remain before the Derby. And I believe 8 of those offer 100 points to the winner. We're going to talk a little bit more about points as we go through some of these topics. So no ads, no drops this week, but plenty to discuss. And based on the last couple months that we've been doing this, we're going to take a look at 5 topics this week. One of them is the potential pace of the Kentucky Derby, overrated horses, underrated horses, the biggest surprise and the biggest questions. And we'll start off talking about the Kentucky Derby pace scenario. Look, I know it's early in the season to be talking about a race that will be not be run for another 6 weeks, but based on the 20 horses that we have listed on Derby Watch and the points leaderboard published by Churchill Downs, it strikes me, David, there's not a whole lot of early speed in the list of contenders. I've come up with 3 of them, and none of these 3 were even on the lead last time out. Go Rocket Ride, Reincarnate Mage, they all have more speed than they showed in their most recent start. But it's a little bit unusual, I believe, that 6 weeks out, we really do not have a confirmed front runner in the field. What do you think about the pace scenario 6 weeks out?
Yeah, I think these are the 3 most likely horses to show speed if they get in the race. And I think something we should note about this list of 3 is none of them have more than 15 points at this point in time. So they all really need to do well in the final round of preps if they're even going to get into the Kentucky Derby. A lot of the horses that have already established their spots in the Kentucky Derby starting gate through the point system, they are mid-pack types, closing runners. So it remains to be seen if there's going to be some more speed that qualifies for the Kentucky Derby in this final round of preps between now and the April 8th preps, the Bluegrass and the Wood Memorial. So we'll see if some speeds do well in those races over the next few weeks. But as of now, it's hard to view too many others that are going to be gunning out of that Kentucky Derby starting gate on the first Saturday in May.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But we do know that these 3 horses, they are short on points, but they do have more speed than they showed last time out. Go Rocket Ride can do a half in 44 and change. Reincarnate did not break all that well in the Rebel. He rallied from behind. We saw how quick he was when he won the Sham 2-back. And Mage last time out, he did not break well at all. So it's going to be a little interesting to see what happens in these 10 remaining points races. And you could just look back at the last couple of years of the Kentucky Derby to see the importance of the pace scenario. Last year, the opening half mile was of the Kentucky Derby, 45.36, and Rich Strike took advantage of the pace meltdown and scored the upset. 2 years ago, Medina Spirit went 46-3, and he wired the field. So as of right now, it looks a little murky as far as the pace scenario, and I want to emphasize at least one thing. I'm not at all going to suggest that Forte is vulnerable at this stage due to the tepid pace scenario. I just want to raise the possibility that maybe one of these horses, maybe one of these 3 on the list in front of us, will get loose on the lead. Maybe somebody will emerge. So a murky pace scenario right now going into these 100 points to the winner prep races. Okay, let's turn our attention to horses that we think are the most overrated among the list of the Derby Watch list. Now, I feel like Benedict Arnold because I loved Tapit Trice going into the Tampa Bay Derby. And David, I'm not quarreling at all with your 10-1 morning line odds or early odds for Tapit Trice. I loved him going into the Tampa Bay Derby, but coming out of the race, there's not a whole lot to like other than his final 16th. Yes, Tapit Trice finished super. He was strong at the wire, but he was under a drive on the far turn. He leaves himself a lot to do. We get a chance to watch him run one more time before the Kentucky Derby. I'm talking about Tapit Trice. He's headed to the Bluegrass. But as of right now, in late March, I think that Tapit Trice, a horse I loved, a horse I don't love now, I think he's a little bit overrated. What about you? Most overrated horse on our list?
Yeah, I don't disagree about Tapit Trice. He's a horse that I liked very early in this process, I think the first week, and I've kind of seen some negative signs in his last couple of races, even though he's been winning them. So I share that sentiment. Brad, I would say the most overrated horse on the list right now is Forte. He's 3-1 on my line. I wouldn't be taking 3-1 on anybody 6 weeks out from the Kentucky Derby. And I just feel like this horse's star continues to rise as Arabian Night left the list after he won the Fountain of Youth so impressively. It sounds like nobody wants to race against him in the Florida Derby, so he's probably going to have another easy victory there. But this horse is going to be coming into the Kentucky Derby off a couple of wins potentially against very soft competition. There are still questions about him going 1.25 miles. So I view him as the most overrated horse on the list right now.
Well, he certainly is the shortest price on the list as the 3-1 favorite. Okay, most underrated horse. Listen, you can call me a homer if you want, but there's a horse in California that I have liked ever since last summer. He's trained by one of my favorite trainers in California. That's John Sheriffs, and I'm talking about Skinner. I liked his career debut. I liked his third place finish in the Del Mar Futurity. I liked his maiden comeback win this winter. And I also liked his recent third place finish. But David, you brought up something interesting with regards to Skinner, and that is he faces a points deficit right now, having earned only, I believe, 15 points. So he needs to run very well in the Santa Anita Derby, which is taking shape with a relatively short field. I like Skinner a lot. I hope he runs well in the Santa Anita Derby, and I hope he gets into the Kentucky Derby because I think this horse, the best is yet to come for Skinner, but first he has to get there. How about you? Most underrated horse on the list?
I think the most underrated horse is another horse coming out of that San Felipe, Practical Move, who won the race. He earned the best speed figure that we've seen on the Kentucky Derby trail so far, faster than Forte. He's already in the race on points. He's got the perfect kind of running style where he has tactical speed. He figures to be in that second flight of runners in the Kentucky Derby. He travels so well into his races and just feels like a horse who's really on the rise in terms of development. And I haven't seen too many people rating him on par with Forte, or some are rating Tapit Trice above him. I think Practical Move is underrated at this stage. He's a major player.
He's a major player. We have him ranked second. He's second choice on your odds line. And that's the perfect segue into one of the biggest surprise developments of the year, or of the Derby prep season. I had two candidates for the surprise development. One was Reincarnate, who I thought was outstanding 2 starts back when he won the Rebel after going 45 and change on the front end. And the second one was the horse that you just mentioned, Practical Move. Let's take a look at the stretch run real quick of the San Felipe and watch Practical Move just destroy the field. He won like a good horse. This is a better horse this year at 3 than he was last year at 2. This was a powerful win. I don't think it was a fluke. I saw his workout since this race was outstanding, and this is a good horse on his way to bigger and better things. So surprise development, yeah, I think that Practical Move right up there along with Reincarnate. How about you? Surprise development of this Derby prep season so far?
I think the surprise development for me is the change that we've seen in some of the barns that are on this list. There's been a real diversification. I think we still have 12 trainers of 20 runners, but a lot more diversified than when we first put this list together the first week in February. Bob Baffert's name was splashed all over this list. Now, obviously, those horses had to be transferred to a different trainer to earn Kentucky Derby qualifying points. So you see a couple of them listed as trained by Tim Yachtine here, who did take over the training. But Bob Baffert just seem to have this endless bench of good 3-year-olds heading into this season. And one by one, they've sort of fallen by the wayside. Some of them have been announced as going off the Kentucky Derby trail. So we see a lot more names of trainers on this list, but I think it's a good thing to have a competitive race on the first Saturday in May.
Yeah, it's gone from a Baffert-laden list to a Brad Cox-laden list. And that brings us to the next subject, the final of the 5 subjects we're talking about, and that is unanswered questions. And I think one of the unanswered questions will be, will those former Baffert trainees that have switched over to the Tim Yakteen barn maintain their form? And the early indications are that there is some doubt whether they will. Now, I'm not placing any blame on these Colts new trainer, because Arabian Night, the writing was on the wall that there was something amiss when he missed a workout, and Baffert was a little less than forthright on regarding the reason for that missed workout. And Arabian Night has since dropped off Derby consideration. National Treasure, he had a foot bruise. That's not the fault of the new trainer. And Reincarnate, he kind of walked out of the gate in the Rebel. Again, not the fault of the trainer. So I'm just bringing it up because it just seems like some of these former Baffert trainees are a little star-crossed. Now, we're going to watch Fort Bragg this weekend at Sunland Park. I think he has a big chance in the Sunland Derby. A former Baffert, now trained by Yakteen. And then in a week and a half, we're going to see Reincarnate try to break from the gate in the Arkansas Derby. So I think that's one unanswered question. And the second one is this, and I wish I had an answer to this, but it's always been problematic for handicappers, including myself, to determine what it means when a horse wins off on a wet track. And there are 2 horses on our list that ran super last time out: Raise Cane on a muddy track and Confidence Game on a sloppy track. I'm not sure whether the wet track moved those horses up, and I really don't know what to do with them moving forward if they catch a fast track next time out. So maybe you can help me out with Raise Cane and Confidence Game, and then maybe offer an unanswered question from your perspective.
Yeah, the wet track thing, that's always a question handicappers have to answer in daily handicapping as well as the Kentucky Derby. Luckily, we'll get to see both of those horses, or we're expected to run one more time in a final round prep, hopefully on a fast track, to get some clues about that form. And as for those Bob Baffert to Tim Yakteen trainer changes, a lot of people are basing that assumption that the horses are going to regress on Taiba and Messier from last year. Taiba had a right to run poorly in the Derby, being so inexperienced, and Messier we've seen since then, and it just turns out he went the wrong way regardless of whose barn he was in, because he's back with Bob Baffert now. So I think people are taking that assumption a little bit too far. I want to see how these horses actually do over the next few weeks. And as for me, I'm just looking forward to seeing who emerges in this final round of preps. Even this weekend, we'll talk about it in our preview segment that we're going to record shortly, but I think there are some horses not on Derby Watch that have a good shot in some of these preps coming up this weekend. So I'm interested to see which new players emerge.
Well, there are 10 points races that remain. 4 of them will be run this weekend, and David and I will be talking about those in the next segment. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free, and we'll see you in the preview segment coming up next.